The Ford Capri was a flash of American excitement when it hit European roads in 1969, but like so many fashionable things, it was quickly overlooked as customers rushed to the next shiny thing. Ever since the last Capri update in 1978, Ford had been struggling to create a new Capri. This is the story of some of the alternate Capri designs, blind alleys, and yes, concepts that were supposed to relight the Capri flame. I couldn't have made this video without Steve Saxty and his excellent Ford books sitting behind me. There's a link in the description if you want to learn more about them. This is the story of the many, many failed Capri reboots. The Ford Capri, as I talked about in my previous video about the car, was wildly popular from the moment it launched in 1969. Given that success, it was easy for Ford to approve the 1974 second generation model, but there were some blind alleys in the development process. Ford had just purchased design and coach building firm Ghia and asked them to design a Capri update. But the brief had been to make something recognizable as a Capri, and the generic design they produced was stylish, but not a Capri. Ford's internal team created two designs, one with a new distinctive side window and one with pop-up headlights. Ford CEO Henry Ford II would decide which one would win, and he chose none of them. He hated both the new side window and the pop-up headlights. The design team ended up taking the front from the first design and the rear from the second to produce the second generation car. What's maybe not well known is that Ford of Britain had never wanted to make the Ford Cortina-based Capri in the first place. They'd wanted to make a coupe based on the smaller Escort. Detroit had overruled them, requesting a smaller sister to the Mustang that could be sold in Europe and exported to North America. The idea of an Escort coupe had never really gone away though, and with customers wanting more fuel-efficient cars after the 1973 oil crisis, some Mark II Escort coupe designs were produced. With the Escort growing in size, it wasn't madness that the next Capri could use this as a starting point, and Ghia produced the Escort Mark III based Capri RS concept in 1978. It was still shorter than the current Capri and looked like an Americanized Escort coupe. Ultimately, it wasn't something that Ford wanted to take forward. Over in the US, customers had been enjoying the Capri, where it was sold by Lincoln Mercury dealers as the Mercury Capri. But the changing sands of exchange rates meant it wasn't economic to bring it into the country. The next car to use the Capri name stateside was the car the Capri was designed to emulate, the 1979 Ford Mustang. The new Mercury Capri was little more than a Mustang with a few styling changes, but it kept the Capri name alive with a car that used a new platform and got regular updates throughout the 1980s. Ghia had submitted this very angular yet aerodynamic proposal for the next generation Ford Cortina, but Ford decided to go a more avant-garde route with the radical Ford Sierra. Undeterred, Ghia offered a coupe version of their design as a Capri replacement, but although this had echoes of the upcoming Mark III Escort, Ford's future direction was in the jelly mold Sierra, and this old-fashioned design didn't pass muster. Despite this rejection, Ford still saw value in the sports coupe category. Germans were still buying coupes, as could be seen from the new Audi Quattro and Coupe. Surely Ford could make money and get extra showroom traffic from a new Capri based on the Sierra platform. They asked Ghia to produce a design that was a little more modern. The result was the 1980 Ghia Sierra Capri concept. It cleverly used the windscreen, headlights, and much of the door from the production Sierra. But clearly this wasn't enough. With North American sales out of the picture due to exchange rates, Ford deemed it was too costly to produce. They'd go another direction, making ever more sporty three-door Sierras throughout the 1980s to appeal to Capri buyers. And given sales of the XR4 and RS Sierras, Ford seemed to be making the right business decisions. But with car sizes growing, Ford's product planners kept arguing a Capri replacement should really use the Escort platform. The Capri 2.8i had shown there was still life in the old boy yet, if Ford could just find a cost-effective way of producing something to replace it. They again approached Turin-based Ghia with the notion of trying a front-wheel drive Capri based on the Escort chassis. like the Italians had tried in 1978, but more radical. Well, Ghia certainly nailed radical, at least from the back. The abrupt camtail was designed to give excellent aerodynamics. The bubble tail-like rear gave a lot of practicality, with a high roofline for rear passengers and bags of storage space. In fact, the shape was almost venturing into estate car territory. Around the front there was a low bonnet to give it a sporty stance. The front lights were pop-up, something Ford of Europe could safely think about now that Henry Ford II had retired. If you're keeping count, Ford had tried using the Sierra platform, the Escort platform twice, and a rebadged Mustang, all to find ways of producing a new Capri. Maybe a little outside the box thinking was needed to bring the new Capri to showrooms. Ford had begun a partnership with Mazda in 1974, and it got a lot more serious in 1979, with Ford taking a 1/4 stake in the Japanese car company. As Ford privately acknowledged, Mazda was making good quality cars, so why not use Mazda platforms for upcoming Ford models? The thinking was the upcoming Mazda 626 could be used for a new Mustang, with the smaller Mazda 323 ideal for a new Capri. An all-star team was dispatched to Japan not just to design cars, but learn about Mazda's lean manufacturing and superior engineering. Designer Ian Callum would go on to design the Aston Martin Vanquish and many modern Jaguars. Thomas Plath would go on to head up advanced design at BMW, and Pinky Lai became head of exterior design at Porsche. The manager would be Patrick Lequemont, the future head of design at Renault. The result was, unsurprisingly, a thing of beauty, the 1983 project codenamed P229. It improved with the second model, the feasibility car, that was closer to a production vehicle. Unfortunately, there wasn't money for both cars, so the Ford team met to decide which project should move forward, the 323-based Capri or the 626-based Mustang. The new Mustang won out, although clearly Mazda were watching what Ford were doing, as the shadow of the P229 design would appear as the 1989 Mazda 323 5-door fastback. The 626-based Mustang would continue to production, although, as I've already covered in my video on the Ford Probe, once Mustang owners caught wind of Ford's intentions, there was uproar. The all-American Mustang wasn't front-wheel drive, and certainly not Japanese. Ford was forced to think quick, renaming the new car as the Ford Probe, duplicating its lineup with the Mustang still in production. Sports coupes still sold moderately well in Europe, with the new Vauxhall Opel Calibra capturing the public's imagination, and wrong-footing Ford, who'd ended Capri production 4 years earlier. But Ford had a replacement that they could sell in Europe without any development costs. The American-made Probe made its way to Europe in 1994, the closest thing Capri lovers had come to a new model since 1978, 16 years earlier. Although the Probe might have been a Capri replacement of sorts, it didn't have the Capri badge on the back. Ford of Australia used the same Mazda 323 platform used for the P229, but this time it would be a roadster. It might seem a bit random that Ford would call this car a Capri, but it made sense if you think of the car's main target market, North America. They'd had the European Capri in the 70s, then the Mustang-based Capri in the 80s. Both cars had been completely different, so it wasn't a big stretch to see this new Capri in that lineage for the 1990s. There were high hopes for this Mazda-based car, but a lack of attention to detail and a certain other Mazda export put paid to their hopes of success. Sales of the Probe, at least in Europe, had been a disappointment. Maybe the next Probe or Capri or whatever it was going to be called should be designed by Europeans for Europeans like the original had been. Ford had put a lot of money behind their new world car, the Ford Mondeo, in the early 1990s, and it had been a hit, at least in Europe. The platform was praised for its handling, so surely it would work well as a two-door sports coupe. The result could have been called the Capri, but Ford went with the Kuga name because more sales were expected in North America, and the new Mercury Kuga would replace the older, stodgier Kuga to rejuvenate Mercury's image. Once again, a European sports coupe would appear in Mercury showrooms, although this time it was only European designed, as all Kugas were made in Flint Rock, Michigan. But just as Ford of Europe were getting back into the sports coupe market, everyone else abandoned it, with petrol prices rising 50% in only 6 years. To make matters worse, the Cougar wasn't everyone's cup of tea. The 1969 Capri had given buyers in wet industrial towns a taste of exotic American sports cars driven in perpetual sunshine. The Cougar's new edge styling reminded them of an entry-level Ford car that they were stuck behind in the morning commute. The only sports coupes making any money in Europe came from premium brands, and this was at the heart of Ford's problem. They were left battling for the mass market with tighter profit margins, leaving the larger profits to the luxury car makers. Maybe they could have followed suit if their bets at Jaguar were paying off, but the Mondeo-based Jaguar X-Type didn't set the world on fire, so a sports coupe version was never going to appear. The only European premium sports coupe in Ford's arsenal was the Volvo C70, and Volvo was still battling to be considered in the same breath as the German premium brands. The Audi TT had caused a storm in the automotive world, and by 1997, one of the people behind it, Jay Mays, was working for Ford. They asked him to make something similar for them, and the concept he created had a lot of TT elements to it. That was never going to fly, so Ford decided to go another direction. As independent coach builder Karmann were always keen to work for Ford, and Ford owned Ghia, the designers thought it would be amusing to draw a spiritual successor to the Karmann Ghia, originally built on a Volkswagen chassis. Not only could it be a good seller, it would also really annoy Volkswagen. This idea was a little crazy and didn't go anywhere, but the idea of a Ford coupe persisted. Ford had started working with Pininfarina originally on the sport car, and Pininfarina produced the Start Coupe concept with a speculative hope that Ford might want to use it. Ford CEO Jacques Nasser was keen on some sort of larger deal with Pininfarina, so Martin Leach, the boss at Ford of Europe, saw an opportunity to please his CEO. He decided to start two new programs, one for a Fiesta RS and one for a new Ford Capri that might eventually use the Pininfarina Start design. But the reality was the Start wasn't designed by Ford, so when the Capri program kicked off, codenamed S272, it would be designed in-house. This time it would be a real Capri with Capri design language, not simply a new sports coupe like the Probe or the Cougar. Ford enlisted some of its youngest design talent for the project. This was a time of nostalgia, of looking back to beloved car brands and reimagining them for a new age. It's something that could go well or go horribly wrong, as Ford had found out to their cost. Should it be a retro design? If so, which of the three generations of Capri should it harken back to? The team was led by Ford's chief designer Chris Bird, who'd styled the first Audi A8. They decided to make something more modern and premium, culminating in the 2003 Visos concept. Although it had a Visos badge, this was intended to be launched as a new Ford Capri, as could be seen from the classic Capri curve on the rear window and fake air inlet detail. The show car was built around the upcoming Volvo C30 platform. This was derived from the Ford Focus, and the new Capri's platform would also be derived from the Focus. With ballooning car platforms, this would make it larger than the original Capri and considerably wider. It also meant Ford of Europe would finally make the Escort Focus Coupe they'd been dreaming about since the 1960s. And with the Mondeo's 3-litre V6 producing 345 horsepower with all-wheel drive, it would make previous Capris look positively pedestrian. There would be comfortable seating for four, we were told, with roof flaps to make rear access easier. But despite the show car being close to something that could be manufactured, the Visos hit the rocks. Martin Leach, the car's sponsor, was out, and focus groups told Ford that they wouldn't pay the sort of money Ford needed to charge to make it profitable. It may have given Volkswagen inspiration though. The new Scirocco would launch 5 years after the Visos with a similar vision to update their classic 1970s sports coupe. Since the Visos concept, the trail to discover the next Ford Capri has gone cold, but that hasn't stopped many heralding new Ford designs as the next Capri. There was the Ford Focus Coupe concept in 2009 and famously the 2011 Evos concept that wasn't ever intended to be a future Capri or even a serious attempt at designing a coupe. It was simply something to show off the new kinetic design language that would appear on cars like the Ford Mondeo, also known as the Fusion. The Capri name had a lot of nostalgia, but it had been based on the Mustang, which had a cool image in Europe, being seen on 1001 American films and TV shows. Why bother with the Capri, a Mustang wannabe, when you can import the real thing? Ford had done the work to make the 6th generation Mustang compliant with world safety regulations, so it went on sale in Europe in 2014, giving Europeans a taste of that sweet sports coupe performance with a 5-litre V8 that could set your heart racing, but stressed your credit card limit when you inevitably had to stop at the petrol station. Slow sales confirmed that the sports coupe market in Europe had disappeared. In the 1970s, Opel's Manta went toe-to-toe with the Capri for sales, usually losing out. Opel showed off a new electrified concept for the Manta in 2021 and were blown away by the reception. But whether they'll take a chance on releasing the Manta as a 2-door coupe is another matter. The best-selling coupe in Europe is the BMW 4 Series, and sales of that car continued to decline. Opel have announced the Manta E crossover will go into production, but they've remained tight-lipped about the prospects of the sports coupe. If the Capri name ever returns, it won't be as a rear-wheel drive V6 coupe, despite regular rumours of its return, and fanboy sketches of a modern Capri that look more like those retro modern designs from 20 years ago. That ship has sailed. Ford is laser focused on electrifying its range, and customers have told them time and time again that they don't want a coupe. If the name does return in the next few years, it's likely to be on an electric crossover or SUV, and that's not such a crazy idea. The Puma was a niche compact sports car in the late 1990s, now it's a crossover that's doing better than the Fiesta. When the Capri launched in the late 1960s, it borrowed the name from the 1950s Lincoln Cosmopolitan Capri, and the 1952 Lincoln Capri, and the 1960s Ford Consul Capri, so there's no reason why the Capri name can't come back in the future as something radically different. But the legend of the 1969 Ford Capri lives on, and it's clear that Ford tried time and time again, against all odds, to produce something that could live up to that original masterpiece. There's much more detail about not just the Capri, but the backstory of Ford's cars from the 70s, 80s and 90s in Steve Saxty's excellent Secret Fords books right behind me, and now with free shipping. Check them out at the link above or the link in the description, or just go to stevesaxty.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.